Have you ever looked at someone you've known your entire adult life and realized you were staring at a complete stranger? That's what happened to me at 71 years old, after spending half a century married to the same man. My name is Margaret Chin, but everyone calls me Maggie. What I'm about to tell you will make you question everything you think you know about the people closest to you. Because sometimes the person sleeping next to you every night is living a life you never could have imagined. If you think you know someone, think again. My early years. My name is Margaret Chin, though I've gone by Maggie since I was a little girl. I'm 71 years old now, and I live in Cedar Falls, Oregon, a small town nestled between the mountains and the coast. I spent my entire career as a nurse, working first at the county hospital and later at the hospice center, where I help people find peace in their final days. Today, I live on my pension and Social Security, and life is quiet. Well, quiet on the surface, because after what I discovered 3 years ago, it took a very long time for my heart to settle down. When you spend 50 years building a life with someone, raising children together, celebrating every milestone side by side, you think you know that person better than you know yourself. You trust with your whole heart. You believe in the story you've created together. And then one day, one small coincidence, one moment of being in the wrong place at the right time, and everything you believed comes crashing down like a house of cards. In my case, it was a forgotten prescription. If I hadn't gone back to pick it up that Tuesday afternoon, I would probably still be living in that comfortable illusion, never knowing the truth. But fate or God, or whatever you want to call it, wanted me to see what was hiding in plain sight. It was October of 2021. I was 68 years old. Robert and I had been married for 50 years. Half a century together. We had raised 3 children, bought our house with money we saved penny by penny, and built what I thought was an honest, loving partnership. That month, Robert said he needed to attend a woodworking convention in Portland. He was always passionate about his craft, so it seemed perfectly normal. He'd been to these conventions before. I remember helping him pack his bag the night before. I even ironed his favorite flannel shirt, the blue one that brought out his eyes. We talked about what he hoped to see there, new tools and techniques, maybe some inspiration for his workshop. Everything seemed so ordinary, so normal. How could I have known that this trip would be the thread that, when pulled, would unravel everything? If you're enjoying my story so far, please leave a like to bring some light to this 71-year-old woman's heart. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the rest of my story. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. It makes me so happy to know what corner of the world is listening to me. I was born right here in Cedar Falls back in 1953, when this town was even smaller than it is today. My father, James Chun, was the only Chinese-American doctor for 50 miles around. He had come from San Francisco in the 1940s after medical school, looking for a place where he could make a real difference. He married my mother, Ruth Anderson, a local girl whose family had lived here for generations. Their marriage was considered quite scandalous at the time, but they loved each other deeply and never let anyone's opinions bother them. I was the oldest of 4 children. Me, then my brothers David and Michael, and finally my baby sister Susan. We grew up in a 2-story house on Maple Street, the one with the big oak tree in front that's still standing today. Our house was always full of life. My mother worked as the school librarian, and she made the most incredible apple pies, crispy chicken with mashed potatoes, and on special occasions, her famous chocolate layer cake with buttercream frosting. My father, when he wasn't making house calls or working at the clinic, taught us the importance of education and kindness. Life wasn't always easy for us. Being a mixed-race family in a small Oregon town in the 1950s and 60s came with challenges. Some people whispered behind our backs. Some kids at school were cruel. But my parents taught us to hold our heads high, to be proud of who we were, and to treat everyone with respect regardless of how they treated us. I went to Cedar Falls Elementary, then on to the regional high school. I walked to school every day, about 1.5 miles each way. In the winter, when the rain came down in sheets, my mother would drive us in the old station wagon, but most days we walked. I loved school. I loved learning. I especially loved biology class, where I first became fascinated with how the human body works. It was my father who inspired me to go into healthcare. I must have been about 12 years old, in 1965, when he took me on a house call to old Mrs. Peterson, who lived alone on the edge of town. She had pneumonia, and I watched my father care for her with such gentleness and patience. He talked to her like she was the most important person in the world, held her hand, made her laugh even though she was so sick. On the drive home, I told him, "Daddy, I want to help people like you do." He smiled at me in that warm way he had and said, "Then you'll need to study hard, Maggie. Medicine requires dedication. But if that's your calling, I'll support you every step of the way." And he did. All through high school, I focused on my studies. I worked part-time at Miller's Pharmacy after school and on weekends, learning about medications and patient care from Mr. Miller, who had been the town pharmacist for 30 years. He was a kind man with white hair and thick glasses who treated me like the granddaughter he never had. I graduated high school in 1971 at age 18, and I was accepted into the nursing program at Oregon Health Sciences University in Portland. It was the first time I'd lived away from Cedar Falls, and I was both terrified and excited. My parents drove me to Portland in that same old station wagon, helped me move into the dormitory, and my mother cried when they left. Nursing school was rigorous. We studied anatomy, pharmacology, patient care, everything we'd need to know to save lives and ease suffering. I loved every minute of it, even the exhausting clinical rotations where we'd work 12-hour shifts on our feet, learning from experienced nurses who showed us the ropes. It was during my second year of nursing school, in 1973, when I was 20 years old, that I met Robert Sullivan. He had come to the hospital where I was doing my clinical rotation, not as a patient, but as a carpenter contractor who was renovating one of the pediatric wings. I'll never forget the first time I saw him. He was up on a ladder installing new ceiling tiles, and he had the most wonderful laugh. He was joking with one of the other workers, and that laugh just filled the whole hallway. I was rushing to deliver medications to a patient when I nearly ran right into his ladder. "Whoa there," he called down, steadying himself. "You nurses are always in such a hurry." I looked up, ready to apologize, and found myself staring into the warmest brown eyes I'd ever seen. He was handsome in a rugged way, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and a smile that could light up a room. "Sorry," I said, feeling my cheeks flush. "Medical emergency." "Is the patient going to be okay?" he asked, suddenly serious. "She just needs her afternoon medications," I admitted, and we both laughed. "I'm Robert," he said, climbing down from the ladder and extending his hand. "Robert Sullivan." "Margaret Chun," I replied. "But everyone calls me Maggie." "Pretty name for a pretty nurse," he said, and normally I would have rolled my eyes at such a line, but something about the way he said it felt genuine, not like a pickup line at all. Over the next few weeks, I found myself timing my breaks to coincide with when Robert would be working in that wing. We'd talk during his lunch hour, sitting on the bench in the hospital courtyard. He told me about growing up in a small logging town in Washington, about losing his father in a work accident when he was just 15, about learning carpentry from his uncle, and eventually starting his own contracting business. I told him about Cedar Falls, about being the daughter of the town's only doctor, about my dreams of becoming a nurse who could make a real difference in people's lives. He listened to everything I said like it was the most important thing in the world, asking questions, remembering details. We started dating officially that spring. He would drive up from Cedar Falls to Portland on weekends, and we'd explore the city together. We walked through Washington Park, watched the sunset from Council Crest, ate at little diners where the food was cheap but good. He was 3 years older than me, 23 to my 20, and he had this steady, reliable quality that made me feel safe. My parents were cautious at first when I brought him home to meet them. A white man dating their Chinese-American daughter. They worried about whether he truly understood what that meant, the challenges we might face. But Robert won them over quickly. He asked my father thoughtful questions about his medical practice, complimented my mother's cooking with genuine enthusiasm, and played basketball in the driveway with my brothers until it got too dark to see. "He's a good man, Maggie," my father told me later that night. "He looks at you the way I look at your mother." Our courtship lasted 3 years while I finished nursing school. They were wonderful years full of hope and plans for the future. Robert's carpentry business was growing. He had landed several big contracts and was hiring employees. I graduated in 1974 with my nursing degree and immediately got a job at Cedar Falls County Hospital, finally able to come home and start my career. In December of 1974, Robert proposed. We were at Cascade Falls, a beautiful spot just outside town where the water tumbles down 200 feet into a crystal-clear pool. It was snowing lightly, the first snow of winter, and everything was magical. He got down on one knee right there on the wooden bridge overlooking the falls and pulled out a ring, a simple gold band with a small diamond that he'd saved for months to buy. "Maggie Chun," he said, his voice shaking slightly with emotion. "You're the smartest, kindest, most beautiful woman I've ever known. Will you marry me and let me spend the rest of my life trying to deserve you?" I cried. I laughed. I said yes 1,000 times. We were married in May of 1971 at the Cedar Falls Community Church. I was 21, and he was 24. It was a beautiful ceremony that blended both our traditions. We had a traditional church service followed by a reception at the community center with roast chicken, scalloped potatoes, green beans, and my mother's famous chocolate cake. A local band played, and we danced until our feet hurt. Our honeymoon was in San Francisco, where we spent 5 days exploring Chinatown, riding the cable cars, and walking along the waterfront. Robert wanted to see where my father's family had come from, to understand that part of my heritage. It meant everything to me. We started our married life in a small rental house on Birch Street, just 2 blocks from the hospital where I worked. It wasn't much, but it was ours. Robert continued building his business, and I worked the day shift at the hospital, 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. We fell into a comfortable routine, coming home to each other every evening, cooking dinner together, talking about our days. In 1978, when I was 25, we bought our first house. It was a fixer-upper on Oak Ridge Road, a 3-bedroom craftsman-style home that needed a lot of work. But Robert was a carpenter, and he saw the potential. We spent every weekend for 2 years renovating that house, board by board, room by room. I learned how to paint, how to sand floors, how to install tile. Robert built custom cabinets for the kitchen, refinished the hardwood floors, and added a beautiful bay window in the living room. Those were hard years, but happy ones. We worked as a team, sharing the same dream of creating a home where we could raise the family we both wanted. Our first child, Jennifer, was born in 1979 when I was 26. She came into the world screaming at the top of her lungs, a healthy 7-pound baby girl with a full head of dark hair. Robert cried when he held her for the first time. "She's perfect, Maggie. Just perfect." I took 3 months of maternity leave, then went back to work part-time. My mother, who had just retired from the library, offered to watch Jennifer during my shifts. It was the perfect arrangement. Jennifer got to spend time with her grandmother, and I got to keep working in the field I loved. 3 years later, in 1982, our son Daniel was born. If Jennifer was the calm, thoughtful one, Daniel was all energy and mischief from day one. He kept us on our toes, always climbing, always exploring, always getting into something. Robert used to joke that Daniel would either become an adventurer or give us gray hair before we turned 40. In 1985, when I was 32, we had our third and final child, Sarah. She was our surprise baby, the one we hadn't planned but couldn't imagine our lives without. She was the sweetest child, always wanting to help, always bringing us pictures she'd drawn or flowers she'd picked. The 1980s and 90s were the golden years of our marriage, or at least that's what I thought. Robert's business thrived. Sullivan Carpentry became Sullivan Construction, and he had 15 employees working on projects all over the county. I moved from the hospital to the hospice center in 1988, where I found my true calling in helping people find dignity and peace at the end of their lives. Our children grew up happy and healthy. Jennifer was the academic one, always with her nose in a book. Daniel was the athlete playing soccer and baseball, bringing home trophies and medals. Sarah was the artist, filling the house with her paintings and sculptures. We had traditions. Sunday dinners where the whole family gathered. Summer camping trips to Crater Lake. Christmas mornings opening presents by the fireplace that Robert had built with his own hands. I look back at photos from those years and I see a happy family, a successful marriage, 2 people who seemed perfectly in sync. But looking back now, I realize there were small signs even then, things I didn't notice or chose to ignore. Robert started working late more often, taking business trips that seemed longer than necessary. He got a cell phone early, before most people had them, saying he needed it for business. He became more private about his schedule, more vague about where he'd been. I trusted him completely, you see. It never occurred to me to question him. He was Robert, my husband, my partner, the father of my children. Why would I doubt him? The years continued to roll by, each one seeming to pass faster than the last. Jennifer graduated high school in 1997 and went off to Oregon State University to study biology, following in her grandfather's footsteps with her love of science. Daniel graduated in 2000 and, to our surprise, decided he wanted to join the Coast Guard. Sarah was still in high school, already talking about art school. In 2002, when I was 49, my father passed away. He had been my hero, my inspiration, and losing him left a hole in my heart that never fully healed. Robert was wonderful during that time, handling all the arrangements, supporting me through my grief, being there for my mother who was devastated. I remember thinking how lucky I was to have such a caring husband. My mother came to live with us after that. She was 74 and couldn't manage the house on Maple Street alone anymore. Robert converted our garage into a beautiful mother-in-law suite for her, complete with a small kitchenette and a bathroom. She lived there for 5 years until she passed peacefully in her sleep in 2007. Jennifer got married in 2004 to Thomas, a fellow biologist she'd met at university. It was a beautiful wedding at the Botanical Gardens in Portland. Daniel married his girlfriend, Rebecca, in 2006 in a small ceremony at the Coast Guard station, where he was stationed in California. Sarah went to art school in Seattle and met her partner, Marcus, a photographer, in 2008. By 2010, I was 57 years old and a grandmother 3 times over. Jennifer and Thomas had twin boys, Ethan and Owen. Daniel and Rebecca had a daughter, Lily. The house that once felt too big with just Robert and me was suddenly too small when everyone came to visit on holidays. Robert was 60 that year, and I threw him a big birthday party. All our children came home, all our friends from town, his business partners and employees. I made a slideshow of our life together, 39 years of marriage captured in photographs. Everyone kept saying how lucky we were, what a wonderful life we'd built together, how we were an inspiration. And I believed it. I believed every word. But it was around that time, 2010 or maybe early 2011, that I started noticing things that didn't quite add up. Small things at first, barely worth mentioning, but they accumulated like drops of water, eventually filling a bucket. Robert started going to the gym religiously, 5 days a week. He'd never been that interested in fitness before, always saying his work kept him in good enough shape. But suddenly he had a gym membership, new workout clothes, a renewed interest in his appearance. He bought new clothes too, more stylish than his usual flannel shirts and work jeans. Button-down shirts in colors he'd never worn before, nice slacks, even cologne, which he'd never bothered with in all our years together. "You're looking good," I told him one morning. "What's the occasion?" "No occasion," he replied, seeming almost defensive. "Just thought I should take better care of myself. We're not getting any younger, Maggie." He was right about that, but something about the timing felt odd. Then there were the business trips. Robert had always traveled for work occasionally, but starting in 2011, the trips became more frequent and longer. He'd be gone for 3 or 4 days at a time, sometimes a whole week. When I asked about them, he'd give vague answers about meeting with suppliers or checking on job sites in other cities. His cell phone became like an extension of his hand, always with him, always checking it. And he started putting a passcode on it, something he'd never done before. "Why do you need a passcode?" I asked casually one evening. "Business security," he said without looking up from the screen. "We've got confidential client information. Can't be too careful these days." It made sense, I suppose. But it still felt strange. I also noticed he was less interested in our physical relationship. We'd never been the most passionate couple, but we'd always maintained an intimate connection. Now, weeks would go by without him showing any interest. When I brought it up, he blamed stress from work, fatigue, getting older. "It's normal at our age, Maggie," he said. "Don't worry about it." But I did worry. Not about the intimacy itself, but about what it might mean. Was he losing interest in me? Were we just becoming roommates instead of husband and wife? In 2013, I turned 60. Robert took me out to dinner at the nicest restaurant in town, gave me a beautiful necklace, told me I was still as beautiful as the day he met me. For a moment, all my doubts melted away. This was my husband, my Robert. He loved me. I was just being paranoid. But then, a month later, I found a receipt in his jacket pocket when I was taking it to the dry cleaner. It was from a jewelry store in Eugene, dated 2 weeks before my birthday, for a woman's bracelet. The price was significant, more than he'd spent on my necklace. When I asked him about it, he said it was a birthday gift for his secretary, Mrs. Patterson, who had been with his company for 20 years. "That seems expensive for an employee gift," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. "She's been loyal," he replied. "She deserves recognition." I let it go. But I didn't forget. More small things accumulated over the next few years. Credit card charges at restaurants I'd never heard of, always when he was supposedly alone on business trips. New clothes purchases that I never saw him wear at home. A second cell phone that I accidentally discovered in his truck's glove compartment when I was looking for the registration during a traffic stop. It's a work phone, he explained when I asked. The company provides it. But his company didn't provide phones. I knew that for a fact because I'd heard him complaining about phone expenses just 6 months earlier. By 2018, I was 65 and recently retired from the hospice center after 30 years of service. They threw me a beautiful retirement party, and Robert was there, smiling and proud, giving a speech about what a dedicated nurse and wonderful wife I was. Everyone applauded. I cried happy tears. But inside, a small voice was whispering that something was wrong. I couldn't put my finger on it, couldn't point to any one thing that proved anything. But the accumulation of small oddities had created a pattern I could no longer ignore. Robert was hiding something. The question was, what? In 2019, I was 66 years old, and the distance between Robert and me had grown even wider. We still lived in the same house, slept in the same bed, ate meals together, but there was this invisible wall between us that I couldn't quite break through. He was always distracted, always somewhere else in his mind, even when he was sitting right next to me. That summer, he announced he was going to a woodworking convention in Portland. It was a 3-day event, Thursday through Saturday. He'd been talking about it for weeks, showing me the schedule online, explaining which workshops he wanted to attend. Maybe I could come with you, I suggested. We could make it a little getaway, see a show, have dinner somewhere nice. His face fell for just a split second before he recovered with a smile. It's going to be boring for you, Maggie. Just a bunch of old guys talking about routers and table saws. You'd hate it. I wouldn't mind, I persisted. We haven't had a trip together in so long. Next time, he promised. Let me focus on this one for business, and next time we'll do a real vacation, just the two of us. Maybe go to the coast like we used to. I let it drop, but that brief flash of disappointment on his face when I suggested joining him, that stayed with me. The convention was in mid-October. On Wednesday evening, I helped him pack his overnight bag. He was in a good mood, almost giddy, which I found odd. It was just a convention, after all, not a vacation to Hawaii. Thursday morning, he left early, around 6 a.m. He kissed me on the forehead, told me he loved me, and said he'd call me that evening. I watched him drive away in his truck, and I remember feeling this strange sense of dread that I couldn't explain. I went about my day normally. Had coffee with my neighbor, Patricia. Did some gardening. Made myself lunch. Around 2 p.m., I realized I had forgotten to pick up my blood pressure medication from Miller's Pharmacy. My prescription had been ready since Tuesday, but I'd been meaning to get it and kept forgetting. I drove into town, parked in front of the pharmacy, and went inside. Mr. Miller had passed away years ago, and his grandson, Tommy Miller, now ran the place. He got my prescription, we chatted for a few minutes about his new baby, and I left. As I was walking back to my car, I saw it. Robert's truck, parked outside the Cedar Falls Inn, a small hotel on the edge of town that mostly served travelers passing through. My heart started pounding. There had to be an explanation. Maybe he'd forgotten something and had come back. Maybe he was meeting a client there. Maybe it wasn't even his truck, just one that looked similar. But I knew that truck. I knew the dent in the back bumper from when he'd backed into our mailbox 2 years ago. I knew the work tools visible through the rear window. It was definitely his truck. I stood there on the sidewalk, frozen, not knowing what to do. Part of me wanted to march into that hotel and demand to know what was going on. Another part wanted to get in my car and drive home, pretend I hadn't seen anything. I compromised. I walked back into the pharmacy and asked Tommy if I could use his phone. I called Robert's cell phone. It rang and rang, then went to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. I went back outside. The truck was still there. I walked to the diner across the street, ordered a coffee I didn't want, and sat by the window where I could watch the hotel entrance. I sat there for 2 hours. My coffee went cold. The waitress refilled it twice, giving me concerned looks but not asking questions. And then, at 4:30 in the afternoon, I saw Robert come out of the hotel. But he wasn't alone. He was with a woman. She was younger than me, maybe in her early 50s, with blonde hair and a slim figure. She was laughing at something he'd said, and he had his arm around her waist in a way that spoke of familiarity, of intimacy. of something that went far beyond a business relationship. They stood by his truck for a few more minutes, talking. Then he pulled her close and kissed her. Not a friendly peck, but a real kiss, the kind of kiss you give someone you love. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. The diner spun around me. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself, and the waitress rushed over. "Ma'am, are you okay? You look like you're going to faint." "I'm fine," I managed to say, though I was anything but fine. Robert and the woman said their goodbyes. She got into a silver sedan and drove away. He got into his truck and, to my shock, drove off in the direction of the highway, toward Portland, as if everything was perfectly normal. I sat in that diner until my hands stopped shaking. Then I paid for the coffee and drove home in a daze. That evening, Robert called me as promised around 7 p.m. "Hi, honey," he said, his voice cheerful. "Just wanted to check in. The convention's been great so far. Really informative workshops." "That's good," I managed to say, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. "You okay? You sound tired. Just a long day." "I'm fine." We talked for a few more minutes about nothing important, and then he said he needed to go, that he was meeting some colleagues for dinner. I hung up and just sat there in our living room, in the house we'd built together, surrounded by 50 years of shared memories, and I felt like I didn't know anything anymore. Who was that woman? How long had this been going on? Was she the reason for all the changes I'd noticed? The gym, the new clothes, the business trips, the distance between us? I barely slept that night. The next morning, Friday, I did something I never thought I'd do. I started investigating my own husband. I went through his home office, looking through drawers, files, anything that might give me answers. I found credit card statements he'd kept hidden, showing charges at restaurants and hotels I didn't recognize. I found receipts for jewelry, for expensive dinners, for weekend getaways. I found a second cell phone hidden in his desk drawer, locked with a passcode I didn't know. And then I found the photographs. They were in an envelope at the back of his file cabinet, tucked behind tax returns from 10 years ago. Photos of Robert and the blonde woman. At the beach. At a restaurant. Standing in front of a cabin somewhere in the mountains. The photos were dated on the back, the earliest one from 2009. 11 years ago. 11 years. He'd been seeing this woman for 11 years. I sat on the floor of his office, surrounded by evidence of his double life, and I cried. Not quiet tears, but big, ugly, body-shaking sobs. 50 years of marriage. 50 years of trust and love and partnership. And for more than a fifth of that time, he'd been lying to me every single day. When I finally composed myself, I took photos of everything with my phone. The credit card statements, the receipts, the photographs. Evidence. Then I put everything back exactly where I'd found it. Robert came home Saturday evening, right on schedule, carrying a bag from the convention with brochures and samples of wood stain. He kissed me hello, told me all about the workshops he'd attended, showed me pictures on his phone of tools and demonstrations. He was a good liar. I'll give him that. If I hadn't seen what I'd seen, if I didn't have evidence hidden on my phone, I would have believed every word. "How was your week?" he asked as we ate the dinner I'd prepared. "Quiet," I said. Nothing much happened. Over the next few weeks, I kept investigating. I hired a private investigator, a woman named Linda Torres, who came highly recommended. I gave her all the information I had, and she started following Robert. The truth was worse than I'd imagined. The woman's name was Diane Mitchell. She was 52 years old, real estate agent in Eugene, divorced with 2 adult children. She and Robert had met in 2009 at a home and garden show where she had a booth, and he was looking for ideas for a renovation project. They'd struck up a conversation, exchanged numbers for professional purposes, and it had grown from there. For 11 years, they'd been meeting regularly, sometimes just for lunch or coffee, sometimes for weekend getaways to the coast or the mountains, sometimes at the Cedar Falls Inn, which was convenient for both of them, right between Eugene and Cedar Falls. Linda showed me her report with detailed logs, photographs, documented conversations. Robert had told Diane that he was planning to divorce me, that he was just waiting for the right time, that he didn't want to hurt me or disrupt the family. He'd been telling her this for years, apparently, always finding reasons to delay. But here's the thing that hurt the most. Linda's investigation revealed that Robert had also told Diane's friends and family that he was separated from me. Not divorced, not widowed, but separated. He said we'd been living separate lives for years, that we stayed together only for appearances and financial reasons. So while he was living with me, sharing my bed, eating my food, accepting my care and love, he was portraying our marriage as dead to his girlfriend and her entire social circle. I was 66 years old, and I realized I'd been married to a stranger. I spent days deciding what to do. Part of me wanted to confront him immediately, to throw all the evidence in his face and demand answers. Another part wanted to be strategic, to consult a lawyer first, to protect myself financially. In the end, I did both. I consulted with Martha Hendricks, the best divorce attorney in the county. She advised me to gather all financial records, to understand our assets, to prepare for what would likely be a difficult divorce. I spent 2 weeks quietly photographing bank statements, investment records, property deeds, business documents, everything that might be relevant. Then, on a Tuesday evening in November 2019, when Robert came home from work, I was waiting for him at the kitchen table with printed copies of all the evidence laid out in front of me. "Sit down, Robert," I said. "We need to talk." He saw the papers on the table, and the color drained from his face. "Maggie, what is all this?" "Sit down," I repeated. He sat. I slid the photographs across the table. The ones of him and Diane. "Who is she?" He looked at the photos, and I watched him decide how to play it. I could see it in his eyes, the calculation. Deny? Confess? Minimize? "Her name is Diane," he finally said. "She's a friend." "Friends don't kiss like that," I said, sliding the surveillance photos across the table. He picked them up, his hands shaking. "Maggie, I can explain." "I don't want explanations," I said, surprised by how calm my voice was. "I want the truth. All of it. How long?" "It's not what you think." "How long, Robert?" He was silent for a long moment. Then, quietly, 11 years. Even though I already knew, hearing him say it out loud was like being stabbed. 11 years, I repeated. "Since 2009. "Yes. Our entire marriage, practically," I said. "All those business trips. All those weekends away. All those times you told me you loved me. You were lying." "I do love you," he said, and he actually looked like he meant it. "Maggie, I've always loved you." I laughed then, a harsh sound. "You have a funny way of showing it. It's complicated." "No," I said. "It's actually very simple. You've been having an affair for 11 years. You've been lying to me for 11 years. And according to this," I slid Linda's report across the table, "you've been telling Diane and everyone she knows that we're separated, that our marriage is essentially over." He read the report, and I watched shame and panic cross his face. "I never meant to hurt you." "But you did," I said. "You've been hurting me for 11 years. I just didn't know it." "What do you want me to say?" he asked, and there was anger in his voice now. "Yes, I had an affair. Yes, I lied. But our marriage was already dead, Maggie. We barely talked. We barely touched. You were always so focused on your work, on the kids, on your patients. When did you last ask me how I was really feeling?" I stared at him in disbelief. "You're blaming me for your affair?" "No," he said quickly. "No, I'm not blaming you. I'm just saying that things between us hadn't been good for a long time. Diane made me feel seen, appreciated, alive. So instead of talking to me, instead of going to counseling, instead of trying to fix our marriage, you just started another relationship and kept me around for convenience." He didn't answer. "Did you ever plan to leave me?" I asked. "Or were you just going to keep living this double life forever?" "I don't know," he said honestly. "I kept thinking I'd know when the right time was, but it never came. The kids, the grandkids, the business, there was always something." "The truth is," I said, "you wanted both. You wanted the stability and respectability of our marriage and the excitement of your affair. You wanted to have your cake and eat it too." He looked at me with tears in his eyes. "I'm sorry, Maggie. I'm so sorry." "I'm sure you are," I said. "Sorry you got caught." I stood up from the table. "I've already consulted with an attorney. I'm filing for divorce. You can sleep in the guest room tonight, and tomorrow I want you to pack your things and leave. You can stay with Diane since she's been waiting for you for 11 years. "Maggie, please," he said. "Can't we talk about this? Try to work through it." "Work through it," I repeated. "Robert, you've been lying to me every single day for 11 years. Every morning when you kissed me goodbye. Every night when you said you loved me. Every holiday, every birthday, every moment we shared with our children and grandchildren. You were lying. How do I work through that? How do I ever trust you again?" He had no answer. "I want you out of this house by tomorrow evening," I said. "After that, all communication goes through the lawyers." I walked out of the kitchen, went upstairs to our bedroom, locked the door, and finally let myself fall apart. The next morning, Robert packed his things. I stayed in the bedroom, door locked, listening to him move through the house. I heard drawers opening and closing, hangers scraping in the closet, his footsteps on the stairs. Each sound felt like another piece of our life together being dismantled. Around noon, there was a soft knock on the bedroom door. "Maggie," he said through the wood. "I'm leaving now. I just want you to know that I really am sorry. For everything." I didn't answer. After a moment, I heard him walk away. A few minutes later, I heard his truck start up and drive away. I went to the window and watched him disappear down Oak Ridge Road, and I realized I was watching 50 years of my life drive away with him. The hardest part was telling the children. I called them all that evening, one by one. Jennifer first, since she was the oldest. Then Daniel. Then Sarah. Each conversation was agonizing. "Mom, are you sure?" Jennifer kept asking. "Maybe it's a misunderstanding. Maybe they're just friends." I sent her some of the evidence. She called me back an hour later, crying. "I can't believe Dad would do this. How could he?" Daniel was angry, furiously angry. "I'm going to drive up there and knock some sense into him," he said. I had to talk him down, remind him that violence wouldn't solve anything. Sarah was devastated. She'd always been a daddy's girl, and learning that her father had been living a lie shattered something in her. "Was any of it real?" she asked me through her tears. "All those family dinners, all those holidays, was he just pretending the whole time?" "I don't know, baby," I told her honestly. "I just don't know." Word spread quickly through Cedar Falls. In a small town, there are no secrets, especially not something this big. I could feel the stares when I went to the grocery store, hear the whispers that stopped when I walked into a room. Some people were sympathetic, bringing me casseroles and offering to help. Others seemed almost gleeful, as if my tragedy was entertainment for them. Patricia, my neighbor, was wonderful. She came over every day, made sure I was eating, listened when I needed to talk, sat with me when I couldn't bear to be alone with my thoughts. "You're going to get through this," she kept telling me. "You're stronger than you know." The divorce process was brutal. Robert fought me on everything, the division of assets, the house, his business. He claimed that Diane had nothing to do with it, that our marriage had been failing long before he met her, that we were both to blame for the distance between us. My lawyer, Martha, was relentless. She presented all the evidence of his affair, the money he'd spent on Diane over the years, the way he'd hidden assets. In the end, I got the house, half of his business, and a substantial portion of his retirement accounts. Financial justice, if not emotional justice. The divorce was finalized in August of 2020. I was 67 years old, suddenly single after 50 years of marriage, trying to figure out who I was without being Robert's wife. Those first few months after the divorce were the darkest of my life. I'd wake up in the middle of the night reaching for him, forgetting for a moment that he wasn't there, that he'd never be there again. I'd start to tell him something interesting I'd heard, then remember I couldn't call him anymore. I'd see something he would have liked at the store and instinctively reach for it before catching myself. Grief isn't just for death, I learned. You can grieve a living person, grieve the loss of what you thought you had, grieve the future you'd planned that would never come to be. I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Sarah Kim, a kind woman about my daughter Jennifer's age. She helped me work through the anger, the betrayal, the questions that kept me up at night. Why wasn't I enough? What did I do wrong? How did I miss the signs for so long? "You didn't do anything wrong," Dr. Kim kept telling me. His choices were his own. You can't blame yourself for trusting someone you loved. But it was hard not to blame myself. I was a nurse trained to observe, to notice details. How had I missed 11 years of deception? Dr. Kim helped me understand that we see what we expect to see. I expected fidelity because that's what I'd promised and what I believed Robert had promised too. I expected honesty because that's what our marriage was supposed to be built on. My trust wasn't a weakness, it was the foundation of what I thought we had. Slowly, very slowly, I started to rebuild my life. I joined a book club at the library. I took up watercolor painting, something I'd always wanted to try. I volunteered at the hospice center, visiting patients, offering comfort in the way I'd once done professionally. Helping others helped me heal. My children rallied around me. Jennifer came home every few weeks to check on me, always bringing the twins. Daniel called me every Sunday without fail. Sarah sent me paintings she'd made, beautiful pieces that brightened up my walls and my spirits. The grandchildren were my greatest joy during that dark time. Ethan and Owen, Jennifer's twins, were 10 years old and full of energy and questions. Lily, Daniel's daughter, was 8 and sweet as honey. They didn't fully understand what had happened between their grandparents, just knew that Grandpa didn't live with Grandma anymore. Their innocence, their uncomplicated love, reminded me that life goes on. I also reconnected with old friends I'd neglected over the years. Clara Martinez, who'd been my best friend in nursing school. Helen Chong, my father's nurse before he died. We'd drifted apart over the decades as life got busy, but they came back into my life now, offering support and companionship. As for Robert, I heard things through the grapevine. He and Diane had moved in together in Eugene. The children told me he seemed happy, which was a knife to my heart at first. How dare he be happy after what he'd done? But eventually, I realized his happiness, or lack thereof, had nothing to do with me anymore. He'd made his choices. He'd have to live with them. Whether he was happy or miserable wasn't my concern. What mattered was whether I could be happy, whether I could build a life that felt meaningful and full, even without the partner I'd expected to grow old with. In 2021, I turned 68. My children threw me a small birthday party, just family, at Jennifer's house in Portland. We ate cake, played games with the grandkids, and laughed. And I realized something important. I was laughing. Real laughter, not forced or fake. Somewhere along the way, without even noticing, I'd started to heal. That same year, I did something I'd been too scared to do. I took a solo trip. I'd always wanted to see the Grand Canyon, but Robert had never been interested. So I booked a tour, got on a plane by myself, and spent a week exploring one of the wonders of the world. Standing on the rim of that massive canyon, looking out at the layers of rock carved by millions of years of persistence, I felt something shift inside me. I was small, yes, but I was also strong. I'd survived my own kind of erosion, and I was still standing. I started traveling more after that. Santa Fe, New Mexico, with its art galleries and adobe buildings. Charleston, South Carolina, with its historic charm. Seattle, to visit Sarah and see her latest art show. Each trip was a declaration of independence, proof that I could create my own adventures. In 2022, at 69, I met someone. His name was William Chun, and yes, we shared a last name, though we weren't related. He was a retired pharmacist, a widower who'd lost his wife to cancer 3 years earlier. We met at a grief support group that Patricia had convinced me to try. We started having coffee after the meetings, talking about our losses, our lives, our hopes. It wasn't romantic at first, just two people who understood what it meant to lose the partner you'd planned to spend forever with. Gradually, over months, it became something more. William was kind and patient. He never pushed, never assumed, just let things develop naturally. Our first kiss was on a bench overlooking Cedar Falls, the waterfall that gave our town its name, and it felt like a new beginning. I'm not going to pretend it was easy to open my heart again. The fear of being hurt, of being betrayed, of trusting someone who might turn out to be lying. It was always there, whispering in my ear. But William was steady and honest. He showed me his whole life, his children, his friends, his finances, his phone. He hid nothing. I'm too old to play games, he told me early on. If we're going to do this, let's do it with complete honesty. And we did. We took it slow, but we took it honestly. Now, in 2024, I'm 71 years old. William and I have been together for 2 years, though we maintain separate homes. I'm not sure I'll ever be ready to live with someone again, and he understands that. We have dinner together several times a week, go to movies, take day trips, and support each other through the challenges of getting older. Is it the same as being young and in love? No, but it's something perhaps more valuable. Companionship built on honesty, respect, and the hard-won wisdom that comes from having survived betrayal and loss. My relationship with my children has deepened. We're closer now than we've ever been. They see me not just as mom, but as a woman who faced devastation and rebuilt herself. I think I've taught them something important, that you can survive the worst thing you can imagine and still find joy on the other side. As for Robert, I see him occasionally at family events. We're civil, even friendly in a distant way. He and Diane broke up, I learned, about a year after he moved in with her. Apparently, the reality of being together all the time wasn't as exciting as their 11-year affair had been. He's alone now, living in a small apartment in Eugene, running his business with less enthusiasm than before. Sometimes I wonder if he regrets his choices. But mostly, I don't think about him at all. That's how I know I've truly healed. When the person who once defined my entire life has become just a character in my history, not the author of my present. Looking back now, 3 years after that terrible discovery in the parking lot outside Miller's pharmacy, I can see how much I've grown. The woman I am now is different from the woman I was then. Stronger, more independent, less willing to sacrifice my own needs and happiness for the sake of keeping peace. I learned some hard lessons through all of this. I learned that trust, while beautiful, can also be dangerous when given blindly. I learned that you can spend 50 years with someone and still not really know them. I learned that people are capable of extraordinary deception, especially when it serves their interests. But I also learned more hopeful things. I learned that you can survive what you think will destroy you. I learned that starting over at 67 is possible, even when it feels impossible. I learned that there's life and love and laughter on the other side of betrayal, if you're brave enough to seek it out. I learned that I'm stronger than I ever knew. All those years, I defined myself through my relationships, as a daughter, a wife, a mother, a grandmother, a nurse. But underneath all those roles was just me, Margaret Chun, and I discovered that person was pretty resilient. The question I'm asked most often, especially by women who've gone through similar betrayals, is whether I regret the 50 years I spent with Robert. Would I do it again if I could go back? That's a complicated question. Those 50 years gave me my 3 beautiful children and my grandchildren. They gave me a home and a life in Cedar Falls. They gave me memories, both good and bad, that shaped who I am. So no, I don't regret it entirely. But if I could go back and tell my younger self anything, I'd say this: pay attention. Not in a paranoid way, but in an aware way. When something feels off, trust that instinct. Ask questions. Demand honesty. Don't be so afraid of conflict that you ignore warning signs. I'd also tell her that your worth isn't determined by whether someone stays faithful to you. Robert's affair wasn't a reflection of my value as a wife, a woman, or a person. It was a reflection of his choices, his character, his inability to be honest about what he wanted. And I'd tell her that being alone is not the worst thing that can happen. Being in a relationship built on lies, that's worse. Being diminished and taken for granted while pretending everything is fine, that's worse. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away, even after 50 years, even when it feels like your whole world is ending. Because here's what I know now: the world doesn't end. Your heart breaks, yes. You grieve and rage and question everything. But then, slowly, you start to put yourself back together. And the person you build from those broken pieces? She might just be stronger and more authentic than the person you were before. I'm grateful for my children, who never made me choose between them and their father, who supported me while still maintaining their own relationships with him. I'm grateful for my friends who stood by me when I felt most alone. I'm grateful for the therapist who helped me untangle my thoughts and feelings. I'm grateful for William, who showed me that not all men lie, that honest love is possible even later in life. Most of all, I'm grateful for my own strength, which I never would have discovered if my life had continued on its comfortable, predictable path. So if you're listening to this and you're facing your own betrayal, your own devastating discovery, I want you to know this: you will survive. It doesn't feel like it now, but you will. And not just survive, you'll build something new, something that's truly yours. Pay attention to your instincts. Trust yourself. And remember that starting over isn't failure. Sometimes it's the bravest thing you can do. If this story touched your heart or made you think, please leave a like to brighten this 71-year-old woman's day. Subscribe so you don't miss more stories from the heart. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it there? Have you faced a major life upheaval? And how did you find your way through? This grandma is grateful to know who's listening, and I'm sending strength to anyone who needs it today. Until next time, remember, you are stronger than you know, and you deserve honesty, respect, and love. Don't settle for less, no matter how long you've been settling. Take care of yourselves, my dears.